We are glad to be here with you today. We're going to have a lot of emphasis on the foreclosure crisis and the issues that are rising up from that, and as well we'll touch on some other things. So let's do a quick run through on the agenda. We're going to start with a federal funding update, and we have Dabney Hegg from the THUD subcommittee appropriations staff, and we will have also a quick update on our NFMC letter, and then from there we'll have hopefully a hearty conversation about what exactly is happening on mortgage servicing and foreclosures today. You know, we've done a lot of work on this in the last 6 years, and I think there's a story out there, the foreclosure crisis is over, and we of course know that that's not the case. So we wanted to really hear from people in the field, and the goal here is that we need to structure a new survey that we could do and really evaluate the performance of individual servicers, that we have the ability then to give to the CFPB and to regulators and really say this is a snapshot of what's going on. But the first step in that process is really figuring out what are the issues, what are the key issues today, and then and we're going to make this specific to servicers. So sometimes we've done this generally for the industry about CFPB compliance. This one will be specifically on specific servicers, and that becomes a more useful tool for the CFPB to recognize where there are problems, and I think makes it more useful at this particular moment in time. We've got Linda Ingram and Ellie Pepper, both seasoned warriors in this work, and to lead the discussion, but we're hoping that you all will chime in as well. We have to figure out which services we should put on the list. There'll be opportunities to put others on individually, but who should be the ones we get the most information on, and what are the key issues. So a few of you have written in, that's very helpful, and please feel free to use the question box to get to fill us in on what we need to know. We'll talk about it more once the call gets started. And then a quick mention on student debt and housing counseling, because we've got the webinar series. It's about to launch and will be going in 2 weeks. This you could use as a training tool for your counselors as well as for anybody else on your staff. And we think we're bringing in leading experts from around the country and advocacy groups working on this issue. There's a lot that can be done for people who have student debt as long as they're government loans, and we want to make sure everybody understands that. And of course there's also the public service component, which can help people working for nonprofits and government agencies, and may help with staff retention in our organizations. And then, yay, we've got our Leaders in Housing Counseling National Meeting coming up on December 10th. Lots of excitement about that. I'm excited. And of course, we'll talk a little bit about joining NHRC. So let's move on into the agenda. And just actually, I want to mention that on our last call, which was the Thursday before Labor Day, we still had over 150 program managers on the call. Appreciate that people really jumped in. This was about Home Ready, Fannie Mae's new program. As you know, lots and lots of issues on the table. So this, if you weren't able to make the call, as always, we recorded these calls. It's an hour and a half long, so it's longer than most. But we had Joe Weisbord from Fannie and one of their credit officers, and we had Danielle Semlin from Framework. This was an excellent and valuable conversation, and I think it's a good briefing on Home Ready and on the underwriting issues, but we also touch on a number of the controversies. So if you missed the call, you can certainly catch up on our website on it. I do want to mention that I'm hearing from a number of you, and I appreciate this is all very helpful, that there continue to be concerns about groups providing counseling and education in the field in person, and that clients having to go to a Home Ready program would need to repeat the stuff in Framework. And Fannie Mae has clearly heard this loud and clear, and they're discussing what they might do about it. There is no resolution, but they are considering some workarounds, and we hope that there'll be good news coming from that. Certainly Framework is a good vehicle to use, but there are other vehicles as well, and I don't want to disadvantage in-person work that's being done in the field. So So we'll keep you informed as those conversations go on, and we'll monitor that closely as we do many other things on the list, and really appreciate everybody's feedback. So let's get on to it. So on federal funding, so quickly, Matthew, how are we doing on the NFMC letter?
So we just closed that today, and thank you to everyone who signed on. Dabney, we'll be sending that to you probably tomorrow, and to to all of the Senate offices. But we ended up with, we're still getting a final tally, but just about 300 signatures. We had just about every state. There were a few that we didn't have, but the country is very well represented geographically. So thanks very much to everyone who took the time to sign on to the letter.
Good. Yes, looks like we have close to 300 groups signed on, and time to get it into the mill and get it to the Senate offices. Okay, so today our guest is Dabney Haig, who's a professional staff person at the on the Senate Committee on Appropriations. She works with the minority side on the THUD subcommittee, and that's of course led on the Democratic side by Senator Jack Reed. So welcome, Dabney.
Thank you.
And we're very glad you're here. We understand these are controversial and difficult issues and not an easy thing to work on, but we've got a broad range of managers from housing counseling programs all across the United States. They're always very concerned about how to deliver to the communities that they work in, and a big part of that is the federal funding that comes through HUD Housing Counseling and NFMC. And so appreciate that the HUD Housing Counseling funding remained the same this year, but we're pretty shook up about that NFMC counseling funds were cut down to zero when this has been, we continue to see, I think you're well aware that the foreclosure crisis is not over for many homeowners, that organizations are really deeply involved in trying to help people get back on their feet, and NFMC has been a very successful tool to that. So can you give us some insight about what happened? And that?
Sure. Well, moving into the structure of the legislation for FY 2016, we obviously have a wide variety of serious challenges within HUD's escalating renewal needs for their programs and their portfolio. Overall, when you add up the totals and the reduction in FHA receipts and the rescissions that were once available have been exhausted, we need about $3.6 billion increase for HUD just to maintain the existing renewal portfolio of HUD's rental housing assistance programs. That's a big number when you have the Budget Control Act and the post-sequester BCA levels that are locking us in at essentially flat levels of funding. While overall the BCA caps accounted for a small $3 billion increase across all 12 appropriations subcommittees, when you take into consideration a $3 billion, actually $3.5 billion increase in advanced appropriations from the VA, we are actually at less than FY 2015 total top-line numbers. So it's very hard in a fiscal environment when you're locked into BCA cap levels at last year's level, and you have an increase of $3.6 billion, well, where are you going to be coming up with that funding? We were able to get a small increase in our subcommittee allocation, but it was only $1.5 billion, and we needed 3.6. So that's a lot of money to come up with when you're flat funded, and the number one priority across the board has always been for this subcommittee to maintain and preserve the existing portfolio of HUD's rental assistance program. And so that's essentially what happened. You have, as the majority, and even Senator Collins and her staff calls it, the tyranny of math. 85% of HUD's budget is locked up, or some say 83% of HUD's budget is locked up in renewals of their rental assistance programs, and it occupies a huge percentage of our subcommittee's allocation overall. So I don't think that there's any opposition or ill intent or you know, targeting specifically on this program individually. HOME, which is a hugely bipartisan and popular program. It's extremely flexible at the state and local level. It's a major resource for affordable housing production. Is cut by $835 million. I mean, absolutely eliminated. That's the loss of 44,000 affordable production units nationwide, and that impacts a little over 1,000 existing rental assistance projects that different states have implemented over time, counting on kind of consistent formula funding over that program. So it's just the BCA caps at a national level have real-world impacts, and this was one of them.
So, and I mean, this is all terrible news. What are the possibilities about getting the caps raised so that we can get back to building housing and supporting the kind of NFMC work?
I think the prospects for coming up with some type of a negotiation in the Senate are better than they are in the House. I mean, you have a Senate who understands and appreciates that we don't want to end up in another government shutdown and that we need to come to some type of a compromise at this point. You know, when you look across the board at not just our THUD bill and, you know, the absolutely devastating cuts we're taking to major housing and other programs, you have those same impacts cutting across like NIH funding and wildfire suppression and other issues like that. And so Democrats have been refusing to proceed to an appropriations bill on the Senate floor until we have to try to force their hand or some leverage to have some type of a larger budget negotiation similar to Murray Ryan for at least a minimum of a 2-year period to provide certainty for this fiscal year and next fiscal year so that we can try to make some reasonable adjustments to the budget caps. Initially, when the BCA went into place and the sequester numbers were set, they were thought to be totally unrealistic and so painful that nobody would ever want to live under them. And, you know, obviously they didn't come to a long-term fix with the Joint Committee. We are locked into these levels. We got a temporary reprieve from them under the Murray-Ryan deal, but those BCA caps are back, and they're back for the decade. So we really, there's interest in having conversations. There's not a lot of progress being made. It's much more difficult in the House, where you have a much more conservative GOP that is running that institution, and they don't seem to have the visceral reaction that the Senate does to a government shutdown. Some members call for a government shutdown. Some members don't see the point in raising budget caps. They don't want these programs to exist, and they argue against them and HUD housing or HUD programs as a party line position overall. So you have a pretty big dynamic shift, I think, between where the House falls and where the Senate falls overall, and the House has real challenges within their leadership to come to some type of an agreement within their own caucus, and they would, in order to get there, they're going to have to partner with, I think, House Democrats, and some of their conservatives will be very upset by that process. So
there is the continuing resolution world, and I mean, in this framework, if we had a continuing resolution from last year's budget, so you're just using last year's budget, that in fact would hold constant on a lot of this. Would that be, so is that a possibility to have a year-long continuing resolution?
While that might be good for your particular programs, it would literally put over tens of thousands of people at risk of homelessness. You can't have project-based rental assistance that has a $1 billion shortfall.
Right.
And they continue to make payments to those contractors. You won't be in the business of providing housing assistance to those individuals.
Right.
You would literally be putting thousands of people out on the street under a year-long CR. You just can't make When you go for a year-long CR, you're locked into 2015 funding levels, yes, but then that means there's shortfalls in tenant-based rental assistance to the tune of over $800 million, $1 billion in project-based rental assistance. You know, you don't do transportation, but, you know, the friendly skies get a little less safe. So it's not necessarily, especially for this bill, to be locked into, or for the broader affordable housing world to be locked into a year-long CR. We have to have adjustments to these housing programs, or we are literally putting people on the street, and that is not a situation that my boss can support ever.
So it does mean that there needs to be a budget that's greater than 2015.
Yes.
And is that possible with a Republican House? How does that happen?
It is a very challenging situation, and I think it would require the House to begin to operate on a bipartisan basis with their Democratic counterparts and face some consequences within their conservative caucus. It requires people in the House to work together across party lines, which doesn't happen very often. But that's what it'll take, bipartisanship in the House.
And what is it that you think we could do, and we being, so this is what your audience right now are program managers and executive directors of nonprofit housing counseling groups across the United States. What role could we play that would be helpful in all this?
Well, I am glad that you're aware of the public perception that the foreclosure crisis is over, because that's definitely a view that tends to be bantered around the Capitol Hill kind of community quite often, and I think it's a gross misunderstanding of the realities of a broader national dynamic. And that they're focusing on sort of their one region or one zone. You know, while South Dakota might be doing okay, Rhode Island still has a long way to go to recover. And so I think that trying to, going right back to the point you were trying to make, that this is still an issue that needs to be addressed. It's not a problem that has been solved, and there are still people who need these services in order to not have them fall into kind of a circle of losing the home and going into foreclosure, or being able to get out of a rental market and change the dynamics for their family with buying their first home. So I think you're right on point with one of the first suggestions you had for the call, is having people have a better understanding and sharing the information from your members to their congressmen and to their senators of, our foreclosure rates still are very much a prevalent problem in this state, and here's the statistics, and here is why this service is important to you and to your constituents, is a message that needs to be continued for sure. So I think you're kind of right on target with what you were thinking you needed to do anyway. The other issue is obviously there's a group of a bunch of housing associations that are part of a coalition that push for adjustments to the BCA caps and what that means for them and for their operations, and certainly joining with that chorus of providers, if you have not already, is helpful.
We have joined the letter and have participated in some of their work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it sounds right that we should think through how to communicate directly with both congressional and Senate offices. And one of the things I think we've talked with a lot of the counseling agencies about is that it's not just where their office is located, but also where they're providing services, and reaching out into more rural and suburban areas, which are more Republican areas. Mm-hmm. And we've done some key meetings with some of the Republican leadership around with local groups, and we'll continue to do more of that work. Yeah.
I mean, certainly people that are on the THUD subcommittee are key members to target, to make aware of the issue. in terms of a short-term goal on both the House and the Senate side. But I have heard people say, oh, well, that's not really an issue anymore, and no, it really still is.
And
it hasn't gone away.
Okay, and just to name names, are there any people that you think we should particularly look at on the THUD subcommittees?
Well, obviously you have your chair and ranking on the House and Senate side, Mr. Price and Mr. Diaz-Balart. They're the ones that make the critical decisions. Senator Lowy and Hal Rogers on the House side as well are obviously ones that make critical decisions along these lines. But they really listen to their subcommittee membership overall, so there's not like one particular member that's going to be sort of a make or break outreach on those subcommittees. I do know the House listens to their members. They listen to the membership of their subcommittee, and that's who they take their direction from.
Good. So Matthew?
Yep. So just to kind of jump in, we had one person write in with a question. This is from David Barenbaum. I'm just going to read it. So he said, programmatically, the House funded housing counseling and NFMC. Why can't the Senate Ds stand up for the program and the working families who are struggling in our communities and benefit from the NFMC program?
Well, the House chose to make other cuts in other areas. I mean, it's a math problem. We have a higher priority for preserving rental assistance housing. Members in our caucus like the Tiger program and transportation, and we had higher funding levels for aviation safety. So you can't look at this bill from one program and focus on it from one program. It's about making numbers add to meet a common goal. And the preservation of renewal of rental assistance housing for HUD is our number one. The House's project-based rental number is hundreds of millions of dollars short. They underfunded contract administrators by over $150 million. We tend to believe that contract administrators are important for maintaining oversight and the efficiency of a program. So when you're looking at the fact that that's underfunded by several $100 million compared to our project-based rental assistance number, you know, there's things that they're underfunding that won't make the program operate the way that it needs to.
Thanks, Debbie. Okay, well, we will continue to reach out to the THUD subcommittee members, and would be really helpful if you can red flag to us any moments where our speaking out would be helpful. We really appreciate that you're in a tough position, but have been pushing for support for our programs, and we appreciate that a lot.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate the services that many of your members provide to constituents in Rhode Island. We were very hard hit by the housing crisis and continue a very long road of recovery, and we know that the services that you all have offered and provided to the constituents in the state have been hugely helpful for trying to achieve some progress in this area. So thank you to you and your members for all the help that you had during this crisis, and I hope that we'll be able to have you continue to provide.
Great. So you're welcome to stay on if you want to listen to what's happening in the field right now.
I'm actually going to pop off and start dealing with a continuing resolution crisis here. But thank you very much for having me, and I hope you guys have a great week.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you, Deb. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so let's move on to mortgage servicing and foreclosures, and or continue on to that theme, I guess we should say. So we have been thinking a lot about, well, where are we at right now at this moment on the foreclosure crisis? That we have, in a lot of ways, it's not getting as much attention as it has in the past, and there are discussions going on right now about when HAMP goes away, what will replace it. There are discussions that we would like to get started with lenders about and servicers about how housing counseling can be more effectively integrated into the loss mitigation process so that these things work more smoothly and, in fact, it's easier to escalate and get modifications, appropriate modifications more easily. And there's conversations with the CFPB about are their regs being enforced properly or complied with properly. So we thought that this is the moment that we should take a pause. We're going to launch a survey and trying to think through what should be in the survey that would then give us as an industry the kind of collective, this is our snapshot of what's working. And this time I think we want to make the survey to be specific to individual servicers. The last one we did was really meant to be servicer-wide to get an idea of where there was compliance and non-compliance with the servicing standards, the CFPB servicing standards. This time what we want to do is figure out where servicing is working and where it's not, and in what categories, so that we can go back to the CFPB and we can go back to regulators, we can go back to individual servicers. And the times we've done these individual ones, we've actually taken some of this information directly to individual servicers and gotten some movement in some cases and no movement whatsoever in other cases, but we will keep pushing on all these. So we thought we'd bring in a couple old hands of people who are quite experienced at this and who have deep knowledge about their own markets that they work in, but also kind of the bigger perspective on the industry. But we're hoping that this conversation will also include all of you so that you would write in and use the question box to alert us to issues and individual servicers, and we'll use this to help shape the survey, which I'm sure is going to be coming out. It won't be the next few days, probably next week sometime, but we'll want to really roll it out and hopefully get a good helpful response. So with that note, we have Linda Ingram, who is with Beyond Housing and has been on our calls before and is also on the board of NHRC, and a wise voice in what's happening in her marketplace. And Ellie Pepper, who has also been a frequent contributor to our work on NHRC and is with Empire Justice Center. And so welcome both of you.
Thank you, Bruce.
And I'd be very interested in hearing what you're seeing in the field today in terms of problems with individual servicers. What are the issues, and which servicers would you like to single out as? And it could be where things are working and where things are not working. So
Bruce, this is Linda. I'll jump in.
Good.
So I guess some good news from our perspective is that we've had a good working relationship with Wells Fargo. We are on a bi-weekly call with them and working from a spreadsheet of our clients. I have 2 full-time foreclosure counselors, and then I counsel 50% of the time, so we're all on the call. And we are able to whittle that list down because of that type of communication to get the job done. So that's the good news. The kind of distressing thing, I think, and having done this for a long time, is that in many cases with the way loss mitigation is being handled, I feel we're moving backwards. I feel that problems that we would have talked about on a call 3, 4, 5 years ago, we are talking about again. And though some of those issues are lost documents, not proper notification for the borrower, not reviewing the files in a timely manner. I think, and now to name some names, and it's probably because of where we are and the number of loans that are in the St. Louis area, but we have a lot of U.S. bank loans. And again, we have a bi-weekly call with U.S. Bank with a lengthy spreadsheet of all of our cases so we can go over the information. So that's not really the problem. The problem is that it doesn't seem that a packet is being reviewed when it's submitted and either deemed complete, facially complete, or not. And then when we get requests for more information, it's one thing at a time. Instead of having someone review the packet and say what's needed, and we can work with the homeowner and get what's needed, it's, well, they need this. And then we send that. Well, then we need this. And we're being asked for documentation that in many cases we can't even get. And an example of that is we had one case where during the whole process, which has been close to a year, an adoption took place, and the family is finally, the adoption was complete, and the family is getting a subsidy for the adoption. So we sent the paperwork from the state saying how much they would receive. We sent a copy of the check that they received, and we sent the copy of their bank statement showing that that was deposited. But that wasn't enough. They wanted the back of the check. They insisted that they needed to have a copy of the canceled check. Well, that's not something that we can provide. We can't go to the state and ask them to send back a copy of a canceled check. I guess we could try. But a lot of these things seem to me to be almost stall tactics. We can't get this reviewed in 30 days, and so we better keep asking for things. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that or not. Let's see. So I think
we've had at least one other person jump in and say that they agree with the timelines issue.
So there is that timeline issue. There is also the single point of contact issue. And I was rereading the guidelines, the CFPB guidelines, and it does say that they provide a person or personnel. So what we're seeing is personnel. In other words, there's a department of single point of contact. So you don't get your single point of contact person.
I think the big question is, can you reach somebody when you need to? And what's the experience there? I mean, in some ways, it's not as important to have one person as it is to get somebody who can actually solve your problem.
Right, right. So going away from U.S. Bank a little bit, because we have our biweekly call and we have our spreadsheet and we're working with that, we can get the information. So that's not an issue. I think we have an issue with Greentree and which is now DITEC, about being able to reach anybody who kind of knows anything about what's going on. Especially the more complex a case is, then it takes longer for someone who's not familiar with it to go back through all the notes when you can get a hold of them. I think I shared with you, Bruce, last week that one of my Greentree DITEC clients, who's in her second month of a trial modification, received a letter from Greentree dated May 27th, so it's September, saying that the packet was not complete and they needed the following information. So when I called DITEC, they were not sure even of what was going on. And when homeowners are sent these letters month after month after month, and when we call the servicer, they say, well, just disregard that. We have a policy where we don't tell our clients to disregard anything that they get from the servicer because as soon as we do that, they will disregard one of the important letters. So we have them open all the letters that come. But there's still the right-hand, left-hand issue going on with the servicers. So I guess I could stop and let Ellie jump in.
Well, I guess I don't have specific, case-by-case examples to give you. Just as by way of just a little bit of background, the Empire Justice Center is an anchor partner with the New York State Attorney General's Homeowner Protection Program, more lovingly known as HOP. And my role is to kind of provide technical assistance and education services for all housing counseling agencies in New York State, outside of New York City, that receive funds to help provide foreclosure prevention. And then I also am a regional coordinator in the Northeast and Hudson Valley area of New York State, specifically to provide oversight and technical assistance for grantees in that region, legal services and housing counseling. So I asked our reporting guru, our tech people, to give me kind of a snapshot of the most recent reporting that our groups did to kind of get an idea, because one of the things that we track is servicing issues. And for May 1st, 2015 to June 30th of 2015, there were 331 issues that were reported. And of those, by far the biggest one was 31% of the issues were with compliance with timelines in the loss mitigation review. And then in next was incorrect modification denials, and then it was kind of equal between issues with the single point of contact and violations of dual tracking provisions. So then this morning there was a local meeting of legal service and housing counseling groups that are in the capital region of New York State. And so I just kind of polled to ask what people were seeing and thinking and feeling about what's going on with servicers now that we've been, this many years into the process. And one of the first things that was said by an attorney at the table was, it would be easier for me to list what the servicers are doing well rather than to try to list what they are not doing well. So some very of the similar things that Linda talked about, but the top things were correspondence like a missing document letter are dated several days prior to the post date, leaving the borrower with a very limited time to respond. Right. Even when a servicer does deem an application complete, they don't provide a decision within 30 days. When a borrower receives a written notice that the application is complete, they are still often asked to continue to provide more documentation in the same way that Linda mentioned. It's, piecemeal, even though they have deemed the application complete. That doesn't even account for the number of times it happens when an application has not yet been deemed complete. There wasn't any one servicer that people saw as rising to the top. They are problems with all of them. Of course, the bigger servicers, are similar across the country, but Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase. Of course, we're seeing more NationStar, Greentree, SPS. HSBC is a bit of an issue in some regions of New York State. We're a little bit lucky here in that we have a really clear escalation process for housing counselors to access through the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, another anchor partner in the HOP program. And that has been quite successful. And one of the things that was reported to me pretty repeatedly was that in many cases, the success of the process depends completely on who ends up being your point of contact. And so that in many cases, it's successful and pleasant, quote unquote, related to how well your relationship is with the person that you're dealing with, who is your single point of contact or your relationship manager, as they're called by Wells Fargo. So those are kind of the top things that were talked about, and I will say I'll also kind of jump on the bandwagon with Linda about Wells Fargo, that they are making an effort to improve. They have reached out. We have regular meetings with top-level staff, actually, and they have a pretty clear process for escalations when there are problems.
So actually, this is very helpful. So first thing I'd like to ask everybody right now who's working on foreclosures, just put into the question box which servicers you think we should have on the list. So who are you doing the most business with, or who you think we are having the most problems with, so that we can't list everybody, so we want to try to figure out who we will be covering in the population. So if everybody could do that right now, that would be very, very helpful. Let me pivot to Matthew and see what people have been writing in.
We've had a few people share just some of their experiences. We had Linda Kirkensmeyer. She said, we've had several situations where the packages are not reviewed with awareness. For instance, submission of non-borrower contribution seems to cause a variety of responses which are not logical. It appears that the documents are not reviewed at all. This is a long one, from Diana Gansen-Mueller, who's been sharing some stories also by email that we appreciate. And please, when you give this information, name names, name what servicers you're talking about, which particular servicers. So she said, so for example, the RMA has a Dodd-Frank section, which when the borrower signs the entire application on the last page, they are certifying that section. A servicer said the borrower must also sign their name on the Dodd-Frank page right in the same box. Not one other servicer has asked this to be done. Another example is a bank states the 4506T is missing from the lost MIT package. The client returned the package via SPS FedEx envelope. I personally prepared the entire package, which included the 4506T. I personally saw the client put the entire application into the FedEx. Servicer confirmed receipt of package. It said 4506T missing. I pressed the rep 3 times, and finally they were able to find the document. This type of failure created a clearly puts the burden back on the homeowner. Why are banks still losing documents? So that seems to be a huge thing, and that's also something that, I mean, in my opinion, the regs really don't do anything on. They don't do any. There's no real controls for lost documents. We do have just one kind of an aside, which is someone was curious how Linda was able to get the biweekly calls that she mentioned with the servicers.
Oh. Am I unmuted?
Yep. Yes, you are.
Okay. So with Wells Fargo, we found out who our regional representative is, and we've known Russ Cross for quite a while because, you know, Wells would come into the community and do specific programs just for their homeowners, and we would be the housing counseling part of their program, which we did again with them last week. So we asked to do it. With U.S. Bank, we have, again, we asked, how can we go about doing that? We went through our community representative from U.S. Bank to find out how we could set up a call so that we could keep all of our loans together and be able to have continuity about reviewing the files. We also have had that with Bank of America, and Bank of America should be doing that. They've been doing that for a long time. So I think you just need to start asking.
It makes a big difference if you've got a large portfolio of with that particular servicer.
It does.
Yeah.
Which really got us. We have just a large portfolio of U.S. Bank loans, and we didn't before. But we're seeing that they're just I've said cleaning house or doing something, but we have a whole lot of loans with U.S. Bank, so we really needed to do this. And it continues to be frustrating, but at least we have some vehicle that we can have and have one person that we can contact that can help us follow up on these loans.
And just a suggestion for smaller groups that may not have quite as much volume, maybe there's a collaboration or a network in your state or region that might be able to pull together several of you to get up to those kind of volumes for some regular calls like that. So Matthew, more in the queue?
Yeah, and actually Johanna Torres wanted to share some of her experience, so I'm just going to unmute her and oh, good. Hi, Johanna, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Great. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Some of the things that we've been seeing is, for sure, is a lot of the smaller servicers are doing a lot of these weird little things. One of the things, Ceteris, they're stating that the successors in interest doesn't apply to them. They're saying that homeowners need to go through probate. We've noticed that Bayview has been requesting weird documents like a birth certificate, and it was a Hispanic homeowner who they requested the birth certificate from. We had FCI, their smaller servicer. They had a second loan on a mortgage of a homeowner. They foreclosed on the property even though the homeowner was current on their first, and the first was actually underwater. And we're also noticing a lot of the smaller servicers are not sending out the modification agreement after the trial payment plans. After 3 or 4, they still haven't sent out the modification agreements. Those are some of the things that we've seen. And I'm out of California, for California Rural Legal Assistance.
Oh, great. And so, so the last one was you had a trial mod, and but the final mod wasn't issued.
They're taking longer to mail it out to the homeowners.
Sorry. So more than 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, that's a question that Matthew had about whether that should be one of the issues on our list. That's very helpful too. Good. FCI I have not heard of, so it'd be interesting if other people have them on their list as well. But, very, very helpful.
And we've also seen the whole issue with the SPOC, the single point of contact. It's very hard to get someone who actually understands what's going on. It does take longer because they're not aware of the case or what's needed or any of the information in general.
And is that because it's a transfer or because they just don't have the systems?
They just seem to not know what's going on. It's not transfers, and it's usually more common with the smaller servicers.
Good. Well, that's critical.
First, we continue to have problems with successors in interest, and we just finished a year-long process with Ocwen. We had a client who was our client. We were working with her, and she got ill, and her daughters moved in to help her, and then she passed away and, left a will. But we've been working now for a year to get the daughters into a trial modification, and hopefully the family transfer package will then put them on the loan. So we were able to speak to Ellie's point, we were able to find someone at Ocwen who really cared about this and who stuck with us through it all. It couldn't have happened without a housing counselor. And I'm saying, I used to say that all the time, and then with the CFPB guidelines and the servicers, trying to follow these processes and all, it seemed to get better for a while, but we are right back where this is a difficult process for homeowners to go through by themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to double down on that. This process. I mean, I think that loans get to effective and successful modifications probably 95% of the time because of the hard work of housing counseling and legal service providers. you know, the CFPB servicing standards really just give some backup for advocates to say, hey, you're supposed to be doing this. It's not that the servicers are necessarily of their own accord saying, oh, we have these rules we have to follow. So I think that that's key. And one other thing I wanted to kind of bring up, I had mentioned that one of the higher numbers of issues with servicing was around incorrect modification denials in the months of May and June of this year. And something that I hear over and over, and I've seen several times, is that the denial letter, although it's supposed to be quote-unquote specific, they're often pretty non-specific. So, for instance, you were denied because you didn't meet program eligibility guidelines. Well, what does that mean exactly? So, the servicer is considering that specific enough. You know, myself and advocates obviously don't think that's specific enough. So, another issue to consider.
Absolutely. Do we have time for one more, Matthew?
Yeah, maybe we have a few, but I can just run through them very quickly. And I'll also say we got a flood of suggestions on servicers, so we appreciate everybody weighing in on that. We had one person say the last deal with Wells, so far so good. So that's the one stray bit of good news we've had. U.S. Bank requiring the agency's tax ID documentation for the release the client information. One suggestion was to use Hope Loanport, and I wonder if other folks find that's helpful. So you see the same thing that the servicer sees. Maybe that does help with the lost documents. I'm not sure whether it does. Ocwen still calls and hangs up before the call can be answered for their appointment. So I guess they're making appointments, but just kind of hanging up. All right, I think that's all we'll go through for now. But thanks to everyone for weighing in.
So thank you all. Where we stand now is that we're going to construct a survey. We'd like to get out hopefully next week. And spend some time with it. And what we'll try to do is break it out so that you can answer servicer by servicer. So leave blank those services you don't have experience with. But we'll try to set up a bunch of questions that you can answer by servicer. And then there'll be some room to add servicers if you've got some outliers, and we're interested in identifying that. The other thing we were thinking about, and really triggered by some of the correspondence we've received from you all, is that we also include anecdotes and descriptions. And we'll need to figure out how to collect those, but it just gives so much more content and color to the context and color to the to these examples. I think we'll want to do that again for this survey. But very helpful. Thank you so much, Linda and Ellie especially, but everybody who called in, and certainly all those people who contributed onto the list. Really quickly, just to hit the other items on our list. So we are, you know, as we know, student debt has been a major, major issue. We're collaborating with a number of other groups that are specialists in the student debt field. We're starting our first webinars September 29th. They'll be on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, and they'll be an hour to an hour and a half long. There'll be a series of 3 of them. We're going to repeat them twice so that we'll have, if people can't make it the first Tuesday, they can come to the second Tuesday, and we'll stagger them so that they'll be 2 weeks apart, whatever series you go for. And there'll be 3 of them, and they will cover income-based programs and how to calculate, how to understand them, how to, we'll deal with debt with loan consolidation. We'll deal with private loans as well as government loans, though sadly enough there's a lot less to do on those. We'll talk about the when a counselor can solve the problem with a homeowner, when you should refer to a specialist, and there are a number of groups now, especially in our counseling world, that are developing as specialists, and then finally there'll be times when you really should just refer to an attorney, and where those are, especially in the private loan market. It's hard to do anything with private loan markets. And then, and we'll also have a special leaders call. I think it's in the end of October, early November, and that will be around advocacy and student debt. And one of the issues that we've already started doing some work on is if you're on an income debt, income-based program, and you're trying to buy a house, how is that debt valued in the debt-to-income ratio? As many of you have brought up, it's not accepted. Many lenders don't accept it as the payment that's required on an income-based program, but in fact a higher payment, either some formula by the servicer or the full payment that would be required if there was no income-based payment plan. And we think this is a mistake, given that these loans can be forgiven, but and try to make some headway on it. But those kind of advocacy issues, will have a team of leading advocates join us for a conversation about what role we can play in these kinds of issues. So please take advantage of it. I'm looking forward to it. Also, big news on our front, the National Leaders in Housing Counseling meeting we've got scheduled for December 10th, Thursday in DC. It'll be in the complex of rooms that are part of the NTI. You do not need to be part of NTI to go to it. You can walk right in and join us, and it's the same arrangement as last year. You know, it was really an excellent meeting last year. We will again bring in some key policymakers. We will certainly have some conversations among ourselves, and we'll have a networking and kind of more relaxing evening with drinks and dinner. Location to be determined. We will take suggestions if you've got some that might be easy to get to from the complex. Last time was fun. It was at a brew pub, and we're going to look for other locations as possibilities as well. But, you know, it's really important for us to get together face to face, and I think we're doing two things, one of which is we are thinking through and working together as a community, and the other part is that we are meeting with key policymakers to try to move forward our work. And there's a lot of irons in the fire right now, and if we can bring any of them to a head, that will be very, very helpful. So please be part of that, and we'll have a special morning meeting for members, and you will also get lunch, and I'm looking forward to that. It's always one of my favorites. And then from 1 to 5 or 5:30, we'll have a broader meeting that's open to everyone, and then we'll have dinner and drinks, which is open to all the participants. So should be good. We're looking forward to seeing you there. Next, people should think about becoming members of NHRC if you're not already. We do have a pretty good, healthy membership, and we're working on strengthening the benefits. But you know, what's valuable is us sticking together and making sure we have a little bit of independent funding, so that we have the ability to lobby and add some organizational independence, and it's also kind of a vote of confidence, which, you know, other funders have recognized that many organizations have membership but don't. You know, a quarter of our budget is covered by membership dues currently, and that's very, very valuable in the eyes not only of us but of other potential supporters. And then lastly, so we'll have our next call on Thursday, October 1, and we've got a couple guests we're working on, but the one thing I'd like to just feature is Leah Coldham has from HPN has raised this issue about, can we do a very kind of a low-key outreach campaign using the internet and using Google Word and Google Ad, and she's got some of her affiliates who are doing it already. This is an opportunity, I think, for us industry-wide to community-wide to try and experiment, to try to broaden out the recognition of counseling and also recruiting clients. So this will be a learning experience for all of us, and it'll be part of the call we're going to do on the 1st. But there's going to be a lot happening. Please keep an eye out for the survey when it comes out. Thank you for all the stuff you've done on the NFMC letter. That was a win. And appreciate the other 2 surveys on the credit reporting and on NHRC should be doing. We're using both of them, and I'll keep you informed about what's happening with the credit reporting. But we're not quite ready to go into negotiations yet, but we're close. All right. Well, keep up the good work, and very helpful, and we'll be in touch. Thanks. Bye.